Hello, everyone. I hope you're out there, though there's no sign of it here. Welcome. This is the 13th. I counted them this afternoon, or I'm on the East Coast, so the 13th of our Khyentse lectures. This has been funded by the Khyentse Foundation's gift to the university that endowed the Khyentse Chair in Tibetan Buddhist Studies. It's really thanks to the Khyentse Foundation that we've been able to run this lecture series over the years. For those who don't know, the Khyentse Foundation is a Buddhist organization that offers broad sort of non-sectarian support for Buddhist institutions and individual students and practitioners, as well as translators and more. They've made a huge difference across the world to the study of Buddhism in universities and outside of universities. So traditionally, we begin this event each year by awarding our Khyentse undergraduate award for excellence in the study of Buddhism. And this year, our recipient is Claire Wingert. So Claire is a senior graduating this semester with a major in molecular and cell biology, immunology, and pathogenesis, and a minor, more importantly, in Buddhist studies. As a freshman with little previous experience to Buddhist culture, she took her first Buddhist studies class with Professor Osman Boparachi, who was teaching at the time on the origins of Buddhist art in South Asia. And she quickly became fascinated with the subject. She jumped at the opportunity to study the many topics covered by our group in Buddhist studies, including contemporary Buddhism, tantric traditions with myself, Buddhist art and archaeology along the Silk Route, as well as some Sanskrit. And she hopes to travel soon after graduating, to travel to Asia to visit some of the archaeological sites and relics that first sparked her interest in Buddhist studies. After graduation, she plans to pursue a Ph.D. in immunology while continuing to search for ways to foster a symbiosis of science and Buddhism in life. So we're very pleased to have had her as our student. She's excelled in every class, and it's my pleasure to introduce her for the award this year. And I think Kenjoli Che, the director of the Khyentse Foundation, is here to make the award in this virtual fashion.
Hello.
Hi, Kenjoli.
Hi. Thank you, Jake, for your kind words. And thank you all for attending the annual Khyentse Foundation lecture at UC Berkeley. Even though we are not able to meet this in person this year, but I'm really pleased that we have so many people joining us all over the world. Well, as Jake said, as part of our decades-long Khyentse Berkeley collaboration tradition, I'm really honored to be here to present the Khyentse Student Excellence Award to this year's recipient, and congratulations to Claire. We have offered the student award for over 10 years now, and it's always such a pleasure to be able to encourage, to acknowledge this good work of our young scholars in Buddhist studies. I understand that Claire is a major in molecular and cell biology and a minor in Buddhist studies. Well, our founder, Dzongsa Khyentse Rinpoche, has always said that while Khyentse Foundation's mission is to share the Buddha's wisdom with everyone by supporting Buddhist study and practice, our objective is not to turn everybody into Buddhism or turn everybody into a Buddhist scholar or a theologian. So we just wish to create the favorable condition so people can have the opportunity to hear the Buddhist teachings and embrace the Buddhist view and the Buddhist value. And he always said that we need to have more Buddhist scientists, Buddhist artists, Buddhist entrepreneurs, Buddhist politicians, leaders, with Buddhist values, with bodhicitta in all aspects of life. And that will make a real difference in the world today. So I'm happy that Claire is interested in molecular science, and I wish her every success in her future as a Buddhist immunologist, a scientist with compassion and bodhicitta, and her knowledge and experience will not only prevent sickness and bring physical health to everyone, but to bring everybody with mental health, and more importantly, bring all us to liberation. So keep up the good work, and congratulations, Claire. I'm very pleased to present this to you online, virtually, this certificate.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Just quickly, I'd like to thank the Khyentse Foundation along with the group in Buddhist Studies for this award. And I really am so lucky to have worked with an array of exceptional professors in Buddhist Studies at UC Berkeley, who truly never fail to go the extra mile for their students. So thank you all for helping and inspiring me to pursue my study of Buddhism. And I look forward to continuing to explore Buddhist traditions and culture and integrating that with science as well. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Claire, and good luck after graduation.
Yes.
So yeah, before introducing our speaker, I just wanted to say a few words about the Q&A afterward. Our speaker will speak, I think, for about an hour, and then we'll have some time for questions and answers. And if during the talk, if you have any questions, we welcome any of you in the audience to type them in, not into the chat function at the bottom of your screen, but into the question and answer function to the right of that on my screen anyway. On the English version, it says Q&A. And at the end, we'll choose some questions out of those that gather there and present them to our speaker. And please forgive us. We had, I think, close to 500 people sign up for this talk. So there's a good chance we won't be able to answer all of your questions before running out of time. Okay, so with those words, it really is my true pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Carmen Meinert. Hello, Carmen. I first met Carmen in 2008, I think it was, when I was the Numata visiting professor in Hamburg. And I was there with my wife and two very young daughters. I think they were barely 3. And I myself was still quite young and inexperienced in all the ways of academe. But Carmen welcomed us there so warmly and helped us feel right at home in Hamburg. And I can't help relating. It somehow meant a lot to me. I always remember her pushing in the playground, pushing my 3-year-old daughter on a swing for really, it was incredible. It must have been over an hour, just time stopped. We were all talking. And the two of them it was as if they were sort of immersed in a kind of shared hypnotic state. It was very sweet. So thank you for that, Carmen. Carmen and I also share many research interests in common. Indeed, although I may be biased, I would say one of the things that distinguishes her work so much is her truly excellent eye for interesting topics. She received her Ph.D. in 2001, training in Buddhist studies, Tibetan studies, and sinology at the universities of Bonn, as well as Hamburg and Beijing. Her dissertation was on the relationship between Chinese Chan, or Zen in Japanese, and Tibetan Dzogchen, or the Great Perfection. While this question of this relationship between Chan and early Dzogchen had long been discussed by other scholars, only Carmen had the linguistic and Buddhological chops, the skills necessary to finally do it justice. Thus, through the 2000s, following her PhD, she published a series of crucial articles on this that displayed her knowledge of Chinese Chan and her ability to discover real points of connection between that tradition and the early Dzogchen-related Tibetan manuscripts from Dunhuang. Her articles were instant classics of the field and are still regularly referenced by scholars on both sides of the Sino-Tibetan divide within Buddhist studies, which is an unfortunate divide that people like Carmen and others are working to dismantle. So Carmen's interests also span tantric ritual, including some work on the infamous Tibetan Buddhist liberation rite, and some important work on climate change, which means a lot to us and unfortunately will probably mean more in the future. Since 2013, she's been the editor for a series on climate and culture, which has published at least 6 volumes under her supervision. And she's also conducted research at Beida University, Sichuan University, the University of Hamburg, and at the Institute of Advanced Studies in the Humanities at Essen, as well as serving as the Numata Visiting Professor in Buddhist Studies at the University of Vienna. So she was well-traveled and finally found her home at Ruhr-Universität in Bochum in Germany, where she holds the chair for Central Asian religions and also serves as deputy director for their Center for Religious Studies, the CERES behind her on the sign you see. It was during her time in Bochum that she won a really very prestigious major grant from the European Research Council, the ERC, and began as the principal investigator on a project entitled, it's called Dynamics in Buddhist Networks in Eastern Central Asia, 6th to 14th centuries, or for short, the BuddhistRoad project, which you also see behind her there. This interdisciplinary project explores the emergence of an Eastern Central Asian Buddhist network while looking at influences from Indian, Sinitic, and Tibetan Buddhist trends, as well as the creation of local Buddhist cultures along the Silk Road. This has been a remarkably dynamic project in recent years, drawing in scholars from around the world for conferences, postdoc fellowships, visiting appointments, and more. And under its auspices, Carmen has also produced 3 edited volumes with more on the way shortly. So I think the talk we're poised to hear today grows out of her work on this project. The title is Sacred Space and Time, Perspectives from Tantric Buddhist Materials from the Tangut Empire, 11th to 13th centuries. So with these words of introduction, I'll now hand over the reins to our speaker and welcome Carmen Meinert. Thanks for coming.
Thank you very much, Jake, for these warm, heartfelt words and warm introduction, and starting with the swing in Hamburg, which is also one of my fond memories that we actually share with your small daughter. Thank you very much for your kind invitation. It's my great honor and pleasure today to give this prestigious Khyentse lecture this year, and to use this opportunity to present some research results, some aspects of the research program that is in this BuddhistRoad project here. You're welcome to look up our website on that. So my talk will be for about an hour, and I'm ready to start sharing my screen and to start with my talk. I believe, I don't hear anything else, that the screen, the PPT is seen now. Okay, so I will just start. Various local people, be they Uyghur, Tibetan, Tangut, Khotanese or Chinese, were part of a multicultural and multilinguistic medieval societies that shaped localizations of Buddhism in Eastern Central Asia, along an ancient local political, economic and cultural system, often referred to as the Silk Roads, and thereby participated in the grandeur of a pan-Asian Buddhist civilization. The ERC-funded project BuddhistRoad at the Center of Religious Studies at Ruhr-Universität Bochum investigates, on the basis of multilingual textual primary sources, visual evidences, and archaeological remains, how these multicultural societies living in and around the Tarim Basin between the 4th, 6th, and the 14th centuries contributed to the emergence of distinct local forms of Buddhism, which we may regard as an integrated systems in themselves and collectively refer to as Central Asian Buddhism. Local appropriations occur as political circumstances changed, which in turn shape material culture, ideas, objects, or ritual systems, which become entangled with local politics and individual or special needs. The project aims at detecting palimpsests of reformulations, displacements, etc., of religious meaning and patterns of motivation in a process of local appropriation for local ends. With regard to one aspect of this appropriation process, this was too fast, sorry, namely of Central Asian Buddhism, namely the transmissions of Tantric Buddhism in Eastern Central Asia, we know that at the time of Tangut rule over Eastern Central Asian lands, space, the physically tangible space, geographic reality, as well as the religiously imagined space, including one's own body, had become thoroughly defined by Buddhist conceptualizations. A special feature of Tantric Buddhism is that one's own body is perceived as a sacred space as well. As I argued elsewhere, the Tangut territory was a sacred environment filled with pagodas, stupas, monasteries, and caves. These elements were mediums through which the Buddhist divine was seen, visualized, and experienced. They represent a thorough transformation that would have not been possible without extensive imperial patronage, unquote. Whereas in that publication, I investigate aspects of a creation of Tantric sacred sites from the point of view of Tangut imperial patronage, today I would like to move a step further and look at some of those sacred sites from the perspective of religious practice, especially from the perspective of Tantric ritual practice. How did Tantric practitioners in medieval Eastern Central Asia perceive geographic reality and experience the world they lived in? How did they perceive themselves in relation to the world beyond or to a divine realm in particular? Is it possible to investigate this relationship on the basis of the materials available to us today? I suggest that this should be possible, at least, of course, to a certain degree. Of course, it would be presumptuous to argue that we are able to know exactly how medieval Tantric practitioners perceived their physical environments and their bodies, how they perceived sacred spaces, and how they acted in those spaces. Nonetheless, I would like to propose a new reading of the sources by combining an analysis of the material evidence with a close reading in order to come to a step closer to asymptotic convergence of the divine space. Therefore, the aim of my present talk is to show the movement from here and now to there in a Buddhist context, or in other words, to retrace the potential movement from immanence to transcendence. I take Tantric ritual practices as an example, as evidenced in archaeological, visual, and textual materials from Dunhuang and Karakoto during the period in question. Here I place emphasis on the deity Vajravarahi, a female deity whose cult enjoyed great popularity in the Tangut Empire. One specificity of Tantric ritual practice is that not only the physical space becomes the locus of immanence and transcendence, but in this process the human body changes status as well and is perceived as part of both, which will be the basic line of my talk. Before I go into the details, just one more note. My analysis of ritual practice is primarily based on the definition of ritual developed in the Heidelberg Consortium Ritual Dynamics. A ritual manual, or more precisely an evocation rite, sadhana, such as will be under investigation here, features a normative description of a divinity in her or his sacred space and an introduction instruction on how to activate her or his divine presence in this world, as well as in one's own body, namely through a carefully choreographed performance. Rituals in a narrower sense are patterned for action and organizations, which are usually consciously created following a certain set of rules. They remain relatively stable and are rich in their symbolism, yet they may be continuously adjusted through performance and actualization. Rituals reduce the unpredictability, uncertainty, and contingencies in human action by prescribing generally accepted forms of practice and action. I now move to my first topic here, which is the transcendent immanence distinction, TID. The audience may ask why I choose to apply a concept of transcendence and immanence developed in the context of mainly Christian studies to refer to here and now and there when dealing with Central Asian materials and non-Christian religious traditions. What would be the benefit for such an endeavor? A rich body of material is available that documents religious life and meaning for a medieval Buddhist from Eastern Central Asia. However, this material is rarely acknowledged outside a narrow academic field. Here, I attempt to make it available to the broader readership in religious studies and thereby to move a rather small discipline out of its niche existence. Framing this material within current discourses in religious studies is one step in this direction. Furthermore, narrower fields of research, such as my case study on the tantric materials from Eastern Central Asia, may also benefit from such an approach that frames them in discussions on the transcendent immanent distinction. I suggest that we are able to gain a more nuanced understanding of tantric rituals and the sources beyond what a purely philological, art historical, or archaeological approach might be able to offer, namely a meta-perspective. And it is this latter meta-perspective which explicates each step in understanding religiously connotated materials and processes of generating religious meaning, which otherwise would remain unnamed or merely in thoughts. This is important, so I repeat it again. The meta-perspective will allow to explicate each step in understanding religiously connotated materials and processes of generating religious meaning, which otherwise would remain unnamed or merely in thoughts. It is an academic method for making decisions in the analysis of even the most transcendent, religiously connotated matters comprehensible. It allows for traceability in each single instance, while still remaining outside inner religious discourses. Thus, such a meta-perspective as an academic method aims at asymptotic convergence to the religious experience of non-dualism, which is at the very pivot of tantric ritual practice. So here I would like to follow the idea of my colleague Volker Krech, sociologist and of religions and director of our center in Bochum, of understanding the religious field as one element of the social field that distinguishes itself from other fields by providing a special way of addressing and coping with contingencies, namely through establishing the distinction of a transcendent dimension versus an immanent dimension. I quote, "Religions provide the dimensions of the dialectic processes between the psychological and the social, with a specific transcendental meaning, and thus is a special form of dealing with contingency. A surplus value is thus attached to social and cultural circumstances, which they otherwise do not enjoy in other forms of treatment. The way in which the transcendental sense is specially symbolized depends on cultural conditions and is defined in distinction from other rationalities," unquote. How does one go about approaching and coming to terms with a specific transcendental notion? When searching for a viable methodology, I was further inspired by discussions in our Center for Religious Studies, where we were testing tertium comparationis in order to allow for comparative research in religious studies. During the academic year 2016-17, when questioning how to operationalize the TID, the transcendent immanent distinction, as a tertium comparationis in religious studies, the following became clear. In order to be able to use the notion of transcendence in conceptualizing religions, particularly non-Christian traditions, it is necessary to avoid the fallacy of not taking the manifold gradual distinction of the concept into consideration. Rather than focusing solely on an absolute notion of any specific type of transcendence, may it be a God, Buddha, Nirvana, enlightenment, which is as a relational notion valid only in contrast to immanence, it is more helpful to identify a transcending process. Thereby, it is possible to approach the question when a phenomenon potentially attributed with religious meaning, that is, a religioid phenomenon, may in fact be identified as conveying a specific form of religious transcendence. My Knut Martin Stünkel, my philosopher colleague at CERES, formulated the outcome of our year-long discussion in the International Research Consortium and introduced a three-level model of the TID as a tool that may serve the process of comparison of phenomena, or rather that may be described as a religious phenomena. Here he said basic transcendence, according to Stünkel, refers to religioid material that bears the potential of developing into religious phenomena, but that does not necessarily need to do so. It is, however, the liminal or transcending process that marks a shift in perspective, but with regard to essentially the very same reality. As a concept, formal transcendence implies some type of self-reference or second-order observation that points beyond the everyday reality of here and now to there. And on an object language level is often performed by a reflecting individual, for example, a religious practitioner in our case. Third, the specific religious transcendence may be ascribed to a specific religious achievement, ascending to becoming an immortal, accomplishing Buddhahood, etc., accomplished by a religious performer. With regard to text, linguistic markers are important in order to identify the turn from formal to specific religious transcendence. And in applying this three-level model as an analytical tool for deciphering a transcending process, it is crucial to bear in mind that, as usual, the three levels have to be considered as being merely analytical distinction and do, in fact, at some times in practice interrelate. Thus, the TID may serve as an interpretive paradigm to understand movements from here and now to there in religious perceptions of space and time, knowledge and practice. However, as religion proper has to tackle the problem of observation of the unobservable or of how to express the inexpressible transcendence, it has to present transcendence by immanent means. My concrete examples from Tantric Buddhist rituals documented in Central Asian materials show that the locus of immanence, may it be physically tangible cave or one's own body, become in fact a locus of transcendence, a sacred space or a divine body, which results in a different notion of time as well. Transcendence as otherwise inaccessible space beyond an immediate reality may therefore be localized. As it is associated with spatial metaphors and thus processes of movement, it is worthwhile to look for such indicators on an object language level when analyzing specific ritual procedures. In an attempt to reconstruct a potential religious context, a Tantric Buddhist context for Eastern Central Asian Buddhist sites under Tangut rule, in the following, I first provide evidences of why and how the Morgao caves in Dunhuang were most likely not solely sites for funerary rites, ancestry cults, and such as my colleague, hopefully here, Robert Schaft, has put forth in his thought-provoking article, Art in the Dark, but were in fact also places for Buddhist meditation practice, and more specifically for Tantric ritual practice. And thereby scholars should interpret these sites as sacred spaces as well. Here, I further explore the arguments of my colleague in my BuddhistRoad project, Henrik Sørensen, who provides ample evidence for the use of such caves and ritual sites. Secondly, as an example of Tantric ritual practice that were also relevant in Tangut-ruled Dunhuang, I suggest a new reading of rituals related to the female deity Vajravarahi as found in the Karakura manuscript collection of Chinese manuscripts, and analyze them with the analytical tool of the above-mentioned 3-level model of TID. As I suggested elsewhere, it is meaningful to consider materials from various locations in Eastern Central Asia in relation to each other and from a network approach. To avoid misunderstandings, I'm not aiming at providing clear proof that a specific cult such as Vajravarahi was practiced in one particular cave at the Morgul cave complex. Nonetheless, the Vajravarahi cult, as one of the most popular in tantric circles during Tangut times, may exemplify tantric ritual practice in locales like Tangut-ruled Dunhuang. I thereby move to my next point, physical reality as sacred space. Among the 492 decorated caves in the Morgul cave complex in Dunhuang, cave 465 is the only cave featuring an elaborate tantric Buddhist iconographic program. In a previous study, I suggested that the frescoes in the cave were most likely produced under Tangut imperial patronage. The central focus of the cave is the cult of Chakrasamvara and Vajravarahi. And much in line with the research of Tony Huber, I argue, I quote, Tibetans had followed the pilgrimage routes of the Indian tantric Pita sites. Such sites were primarily understood as related to internal yoga practice, meant to realize the mandala of a given deity within one's own body, and as a Vajra body, also manifested in the external world with certain deities presiding in the geographical Vajra body, unquote. Moreover, I suggest that this trend to relocate the superimposed Vajra body onto its own geographical realm also occurred under Tangut rule, and that we may understand Morgul Cave 465 as an exquisite example of such a tantric ritual space. Here, I provide further evidence in support of my hypothesis that 465 is in fact a tantric site in the Pita cultic circuit and is in the vicinity of charnel grounds. This is evident on the microcosmic level of depictions of deities within the cave, as well as on the macrocosmic level of the location of the cave in the larger sacred space of Morgul Cave Complex. Charnel grounds were preferred sites for tantric meditation practice, and in tantric literature are often referred to as the 8 cemeteries or 8 charnel grounds. In my previous study, I also suggest that in order to fully appreciate K465, it needs to be understood in the context of, did I miss a slide here? No, I didn't, sorry. In my previous study, I also suggest that in order to fully appreciate K465, it needs to be understood in the context of other related sites and findings, such as from Karakoto. In related visual materials, we find not only depictions of tantric deities such as Vajravarahi, but also much more information of tantric ritual practice. As such, Karakoto Tanka X2388, which depicts Vajravarahi as central deity, vividly illustrates the place where her ritual practice is to be performed, namely in charnel grounds. There are endless skulls and bones surrounding her mandala. A similar scene is portrayed in Morgul Cave 465 as well. Above the mandala of Chakrasamvara, there is a meditator practicing in a charnel ground. Presumably, these depictions, although they represent topos clearly transferred from the Indian cultural context that developed in the religious encounter with purity concepts of Brahmanical traditions, do not simply refer to the basic Buddhist assumption of existence as impermanent, but were taken literally. Charnel grounds are perfect sites for accomplishing tantric practice. They are ideal places for completely cutting through all attachment of mundane reality and seeing death not as something impure as in the Brahmanical tradition in India, but as an opportunity for awakening, for accomplishing the Buddha's Dhammakaya, the ultimate body of truth, within a mundane context of immanent reality. Therefore, it is worthwhile to look at the Morgul Cave Complex as a whole in order to better understand the specific location of an individual cave within the iconographic program of K465. It is on the macrocosmic level of the sacred site of Morgul Cave Complex that 465 forms part of the northern section of the cave complex. So you have the southern section, and then below you should visualize the northern section just next to it. These caves in the northern sections were partially functioned as burial sites, and so present a somewhat similar situation to the charnel grounds, insofar as they are also associated with death and impermanence. Recent Chinese excavations add in scholarship on the site prove that the northern section, which stretches for about 600 meters, mainly supported practical functions with caves used for habitation, meditation, and burial. Cave 465 is situated at the most northern end, by far away from the much busier southern section, which covers about 1,000 meters and was primarily used for worship at its temples and shrines. In 2004, the Dunhuang Academy published 3 volumes dealing with just the northern section, the Dunhuang Mogoku Beichu Shuku. This publication is a great resource for investigating the exact location of 465 and its immediate surroundings. The volumes list all locations with their associated findings, some of which include human bones. Altogether, the remains of 53 bodies, including skulls, were found, roughly dating to the period from the 7th to the 13th centuries. Burial, most likely of Buddhist practitioners of some type, was an ongoing social practice, and one can only speculate that it must have been a privilege to leave behind one's bodily remains in a location of high Buddhist prestige, such as the Mogao Caves. As a tantric ritual space, Mogao Cave 465 was in fact built on top of 2 burial sites, Cave B42 and B43. Cave 465 was likely excavated in the year 839, according to a Tibetan inscriptions on the southern wall of the entrance to the main hall. However, it was only decorated with a still visible tantric iconographic program more than 350 years later, most likely under Tangut rule in the 12th century, when Tibetan masters were invited to the Tangut court. We do not know how the cave was used between the time of excavation and decoration. However, given its immediate surroundings, I do not think it is surprising that Cave 465 was the site chosen for a tantric iconographic program at a time when tantric Buddhism enjoyed Tangut imperial patronage and extending its exchanges with the Tibetan Buddhist world. Apart from the fact that Cave 465 was created in conjunction with burial sites, we know that of the 53 bodily remains found in the Mogao Cave complex, 15 show traces indicating that the skulls were removed from the body of the skeleton, and part of the skulls were deliberately cut off. Of these, 5 are found in Cave 42, immediately below Cave 465, and 5 are found in B48 in the immediate vicinity of Cave 465, about 15 meters to its left. That the skulls were in fact purposefully sawn off is more clearly visible in the example from burial Cave 109, a cave also located in the northern section about 480 meters to the left of Cave 465. Since there is not yet a date available for when the skulls were sawn off, we can only gather additional information on the use of the skulls when interpreting them in the larger context. Why would medieval Central Asian people, presumably Buddhist, at a sacred site like the Mogao Caves and in the immediate vicinity of the sole Tantric Buddhist cave, cut off the upper part of a skull, if not for the purpose of ritual use? In fact, the northern section of the Mogao Cave complex in Cave B121, about 200 meters to the left of Cave 465, 2 objects were found. Namely, a neatly cut oval-shaped piece of the upper part of a skull, whose shape indicates that it was used as a tantric ritual object, a skull cup, a Kabbalah, which is a ritual object that is used as a libation vessel for practices related to many wrathful and protective deities. And secondly, a stand, attached to it. A variety of paintings from Mogao Cave 465 in Karakoto show the use of skull cap by tantric practitioners. In 465, there is a depiction of Hevajra in union with the consort, and to both sides of the lotus flower base that the deities stand on, there are depictions of a local tantric practitioner with a white hat and maybe an Indian, we don't know, master of having skull caps used as ritual offering vessels and placed in front of them. Furthermore, in another example on the Vajravarahi Tanka X23 1494 from Karakoto, there is a figure of a tantric master in the lower right corner of the Tanka. Here he holds the Vajra and a bell in his hand and a skull cap on a stand in front of him. In fact, that stand looks exactly like the object found in our cave in Dunhuang, B121. Therefore, we may infer that the skull cap found in B121 was in fact used as a ritual object in tantric ritual practice. Although Chinese scholars argue that cave B121 was used as a burial cave, I suggest that it was also used as a meditation cave, in which tantric practice was performed in a similar setting to a charnel ground. This is also supported by fragments of scriptures found in the cave, including 18 fragments of Tanguj printed text, provisionally referred to by Chinese scholars as Zhu Mizhou Yao Yu, essential words of all Buddhist spells. And including it, there is one text on dream yoga, for example. In such a burial meditation cave, one could easily envision a meditation practitioner among bodily remains, just as it is depicted in one of the scenes in cave 465. Thus, cave B121 is a rare case that allows us to understand the lived space of a cave in Mogao, informed by our understanding of tantric ritual practice. What can we say about this specific cave, and by inference about other caves used for ritual purposes with regard to the TID, the transcendent immanent distinction? If we apply the analytical tools of the three-level model TID, we may identify palimpsests of religious meaning attributed to physical space and material objects. Firstly, a cave excavated from a rock is simply a hole dug into a stone. However, it does have the potential of developing into a religious phenomenon because the very act of excavation is religiosified when it takes place in the context of an environment with a long documented history of Buddhist activities. Thus, an excavated cave at Mogao Cave Complex fulfills the criteria of religioid material for basic transcendence. As cave B121 has remains of objects, a skull cap and ritual texts that were likely used by a religious practitioner, we have at least a hint to a reflecting individual, likely with some type of vision to move beyond the everyday reality of here and now to there, which is a criteria for formal transcendence. In order to get a step further in our understanding of a practitioner's perception of space, that is, in the transformation of physical space into a sacred space, and thus in analyzing the potential transcending process leading to a specific religious transcendence, we need to investigate specific tantric ritual procedures, which were also potentially practiced in the Mogao caves. So far, I did not come across relevant texts anywhere in the northern section of the Mogao caves, which does not mean that there are none. However, a ritual text from Karakoto collection describes in detail how and where to perform such rites. As the female deity Vajravarahi constitutes the main focus of our K465, the Chinese scholar Ran Li suggested even that a statue of Vajravarahi used to enthrone the central altar, which originally had 5 tiers. It is necessary to look at Vajravarahi ritual texts to investigate the potential use of that cave. I suggest that apart from any other usage, K465 was most likely used for communal rites because of its larger size, and by inference that other burial meditation caves, such as cave B121, were used for individual meditation practice due to the smaller sizes. In the Tangut Empire, tantric texts were produced in Tibetan, Chinese, and Tangut to cater for a multicultural society. An interesting example for our query into ritual practices related to Vajravarahi is found in the Chinese ritual Karakodo text A14, Jingang Haimu Qi Lun Gongyang Ci Di Lu, stages on making offerings to and feast offerings to the gathering of Vajravarahi. It is a rather detailed instruction of how to perform a communal offering to Vajravarahi in order to please the deity and at the same time to strengthen the cohesion of the tantric ritual community. It is meant to be led by an accomplished ritual master. Let us take a closer look at the first 2 of 4 sections of the ritual text: the preparations for the mandala, that is the establishing of the mandala, and the self-identification with the deity. What are the prerequisites to evoke the divine presence during a communal feast offering? In order for the ritual to be performed correctly and thus efficaciously, difficult word, efficaciously, the following criteria need to be met. First, the right time. Second, right place, right agents, right altar, and right offerings. These are described in detail in the text, and they are listed here. I won't read them to you. If we compare the information given in this ritual text with the setting of K465 in terms of 2, the right place, K465 certainly fulfills the criteria of a ritual space built on a charnel ground. And 5, the offerings such as flowers and banners are even partly visible as decorations on the originally 5-tiered altar. Moreover, it has 4, the altar on which to place the mandala with an 8-petaled lotus and a source of Dharma, a chöjong in Tibetan or Fashangong in Chinese. In the Karakodo collection, we find, in fact, this wonderful fragment X2405, which is an image of a mandala with an 8-petaled lotus and a triangle that is a source of Dharma, a chöjong, just as it is described in our ritual text. The catalogue does not further identify this fragment, but simply refers to it as a lotus mandala, tentatively dating it to the 13th, 14th century. However, given the overall context and related materials from Karakodo and Dunhuang, I would tend to date X2405 to the late 12th and early 13th centuries. What we have here is instead the basis for invoking Vajravarahi. Her seeds are bum here in the center of the triangle, and her mantra Ha, Ri, Ni, and not visible Sa here, which would be below the triangle, are written in Tibetan script. Given the size of the fragment 29.5 by 58 centimeters, could it not be that this silken image was used for ritual purpose, such as during a feast offering, like the one described in our ritual text, Stages of Making Offerings to Vajravarahi? There are, in fact, 3 vertical folds and 1 horizontal fold in the material, which indicate that the image was folded and perhaps also that it was unfolded when being used, like during ritual performance. There is additional information in our ritual text that I just mentioned related to K465's potential use as a ritual space. If we look at the agents mentioned in our ritual text, what are their roles in the main section of the ritual when the divine presence is actually invoked? I have sections translated here in my article. You will have the full translation. The master clearly acts as the head of the rite, the master of ceremonies. He establishes the mandala and uses other ritual implements. 2 skull cups are used as offering vessels, and another skull cup is used to place a mirror on top of it to create the seat where Vajravarahi and a retinue of 6 Buddha mothers are invited to manifest themselves in front of the ritual master and the community of practitioners. I won't read the full text here to you. You can browse through it. So what we have here, this ritual text actually describes the established altar as a frame for the divinity, which simultaneously gives authority to the ritual master, since he is able to gather and direct the powers of the divinity. Moreover, we may gather from the text that the encounter with the divine presence in this specific context is not just a subjective event of the master, but it is also very much a social one. This ritual is not solely about a subjective inner experience, but it is about a communal process. The ritual master needs the community of practitioners in order to perform the rite properly, because in his special ritual, the role as a meditator with the divine entity is recognized by the community. And only through this does he gain the necessary authority and power. Moreover, master and disciple are bound to each other or through their tantric commitments and pledges. And it is this bond that ensures the efficacy of tantric ritual, even for practitioners unable to engage in complex visualizations. I don't know whether you can still hear me. I got a note. No. Okay, I will continue. It is as if the link to the elite practitioners through pledges is enough to guarantee the benefits for the wider community of practicing in such a ritual. The communal event is thereby charged through the reciprocal effect. Let us return to the initial question of how to conceptualize the transformation of a physical space, such as K465 at Moorgau, into what I suggest was a sacred space. K465 was built on top of burial sites, provides the clearly defined ritual space as a channel ground. And the physical space of such a cave would be transformed as well and turned into the local of a transcendent presence. If we apply the three-level model of TID, we are now able to identify an additional step in our analysis of the transcending process. A cave as a place for religious practice can I get informations here, but I don't know. I continue. I don't know whether you can still hear me. We are now able to identify an additional step in the transcending process. A cave as a place for religious practice can be identified as a religioid phenomenon, and thus as an indication of basic transcendence. Given the information presented about the ritual master, okay, maybe I just look. There are informations in the chat. Okay, I can hear fine. Okay, so I continue. Sorry about that. I was confused. So given the information presented about the ritual master from the ritual manual analyzed, we can now clearly identify a reflecting individual who is able to move beyond everyday reality of here and now to there, which is a criterion for formal transcendence. Furthermore, the ritual master is skilled in actually summoning a divine presence into the ritual location, an accomplishment of a specific religious achievement that, by the terminology of Knut Stunkel, would correspond to the accomplishment of a specific religious transcendence. Thus, it is possible to apply this three-level model of TID to identify specific steps in the transcending process as it is described in our ritual manual. If K465 was used in such a way, one may wonder whether the two burial sites, B42 and 48 in its immediate vicinity, each of which contain 5 skull cups with their upper parts deliberately cut off, function as a local supply for skull cups used in tantric ritual practice performed in K465 or in local tantric practice per se. Okay, so as I just analyzed, the ritual text prescribes an external yogic practice, namely drawing a mandala of Vajrayana on the outer physical space and on an altar at a channel ground during a process of communal offering. On the other hand, the Karakodo text, A19, Jingang Haimu Chanding meditation on Vajravarahi also describes the transformation of one's own body into a divine body, and thus is an instruction on an individual ritual practice. According to the prescription provided in the text, the divine presence Vajravarahi is visualized internally in order to direct the powers of the divinity within one's own subtle body, with the aim of accomplishing awakening within this very coarse, immanent body. For the present context, I approach the question, what makes any ritual text, or in this particular text, in our case, convey a specific religious transcendence. As my colleague Stünkel suggested, that the analysis of a transcending process, as in our ritual text, it is also possible to identify spatial metaphors on the object language level, and as processes of movement that enable us to localize references to both immanence and transcendence. This is in downward and upward movements, respectively. Downward movements will be red, visible in red, and upward movements in blue in a moment. The analysis of these movements allows one to make some conclusions about tantric ritual practice with regard to my understanding of the practitioner's perception of bodily space and time. For my analysis of object language markers of movements relevant to the transcending process, I will present you some text examples here, sections from the description of the divinity. You can read it. It's a standard description of a divinity, and I'm just interested what I highlighted here, the sentence with the red and the blue highlights. The very fact that Vajravarahi has two faces, namely it says her right soul face looks upward, her left wrathful face looks downward. So the very fact that she has two faces instead of just one face of ordinary beings points to her ability to be present in both realms, in the here and now immanent reality presented in the south face and in the transcendent realm of there presented in the wrathful face. Similar ritual texts from the Tibetan tradition describe the two faces of Vajravarahi as illustrated as the two sides of reality, that is the relative Khyentse and the absolute Döndam reality. The two faces are a pair, two sides of the same coin, and they cannot get the one without the other. The eyes of the south face actually look from here and now upward to there, from the immanent to the transcendent realm, whereas the eyes of the wrathful face, illustrating the absolute, consequentially look down from transcendent realm into the immanent reality. Thus, there are not only two elements, but four intertwined with each other, namely two elements of movement between transcendent and immanence, and two faces representing both aspects. Therefore, in the sentence in question from the ritual manual, we can mark the south face representing the immanent aspects in red and this wrathful face representing the transcendent aspect in blue. Her right face, south face looks upward and her left wrathful face looks downward. Let us turn to another section from our ritual manual to analyze the transcending process and thus to further identify spatial metaphors on an object language level. The ritual text says that once the practitioner evokes the presence of Vajravarahi in herself or himself, she or he uses it for a specific yogic exercise of the subtle body in order to direct the transcendental power of the divinity within one's own immanent body. I have again here the relevant passage for you, and I will just focus on the highlights where you have the object language markers, namely you have two places here with object language markers of movement relevant for the transcending process. Firstly, it says that the practitioner should hold up the energy of the lower chakra and close down the breathing from the nose. It is thus an exercise of breath control. Secondly, and more importantly, the closing of the upper and the lower part of the lateral channels of the subtle body allows for the movement of energy in the central channel, with red light moving upward and a drop of white bodhicitta, that is the vital essence, Tibetan tile, melting down. A practitioner who is able to engage in the yogic exercise described here would be familiar with the tantric physiology of the subtle body, or of the Vajra body, the Vajrakaya, to be able to realize the coarse body as a divine palace or a temple, and thus as a local for awakening. However, the description of this most crucial passage in our ritual manual is rather terse and needs further explanation in order to fully comprehend the context in the context of the transcendence immanence distinction. We can be sure that in Tangut times, this knowledge of the physiology was present as well. In order to navigate properly the energy within the body, according to our ritual manual meditation of Vajravarahi, one has to have knowledge of the subtle body. From the outset, tantric physiology is intricately linked to conception and of how a mind undergoing rebirth blends with semen and ovum. According to the physiology of the subtle body, is believed to develop around the 3rd week of conception. As the embryo grows, the first energy center, the navel chakra, emerges. The channel originates from this first, the upward and then the downward central channel, then the 2 lateral channels, and then all the other chakras and other places where the lateral channels are intertwined and form knots. Since the mind is completely embodied through the channels, it can therefore be affected by yogic exercises focusing on the body. The central channel presenting non-dual reality is the main focus of the yogic exercise. The central channel represents non-dual reality, whereas the lateral channels represent duality, a split occurring when reality is not perceived and misperceived as subject-object duality. Thus, one's own energy has to be brought from the lateral channels to the central channel by closing down the lateral channels. And when mind is inserted into the central channel, non-dual reality, the true nature of things, and emptiness inseparable from bliss is said to be realized. The description of the yogic exercise given in our Karakoto manual, Meditation on Vajravarahi, hints to the meditative process through which the just described, namely the separation of the red and white tile constituents. Here, as we see on the right side, the syllable bam and the syllable ham are separated, and then eventually this process is reversed and they melt together and are united in the heart, and non-duality once again is experienced on a bodily level. What enables the upward and downward movement in the central channel, object, language markers of movement to allow one to identify a transcending process, is the activation of the so-called source of Dharma, the Chöjung, or the Fa Shen Gong in Chinese. It gives rise to the divinity and to all conditioned phenomena. And thus, transcendence is visualized within this very immanent body. Much in line with this description, textual and visual materials from Karakoto show the transmission of this knowledge in the Tangut Empire as well. And we have, for example, here an illustration in the Tankara X2391 of Vajravarahi, which depicts her standing on a course and arising from a source of Dharma, a Chöjung. Moreover, all the Vajravarahi qualities eventually that are described, providing an excellent explanation of how Vajravarahi actually got her name. And we have a further interesting text from Karakoto, TK 329, notes on the 4-syllable Dakini, where I don't want to read all of this, but we have some, you can go through it. We have some interesting passage here, which hint, on the one hand side, give the explanation that she was born without attachment to time, and oops, a lot too fast. And the ultimate explanation concerns the emptiness of the body of the central channel. It is the channel that gives rise to birth of nirvana and samsara and possesses the appearance of the 4 chakras, gives birth to various channels and nurtures the body. All born in this world and beyond this world are born from the central channel. That's why she is called mother. So basically, you do have in the Karakoto manuscripts evidence for knowledge of this tantric physiology. With regard to the observations concerning the transcendence immanent distinctions, we may draw the following conclusions for the perceptions of bodily space and time. Firstly, according to the ritual text, Meditation on Vajravarahi, the visualized deity with the coarse body of a practitioner has as its center the source of Dharma, the Chögyam, representing unoriginated transcendent reality. Connected to it is the central channel, eventually representing non-dual reality. And when a drop of wide and cool bodhicitta melts down in the central channel, the process of separation that was initiated at a time at birth when the umbilical cord was actually cut and gave rise to the perception of duality within an immanent coarse body, it is said that this process is reversed to the perception of non-duality within the transcendent subtle body. A drop of transcendence actually melts down within one's own body. This is an interesting intersection between concept and physicality. Secondly, a different understanding of time is also related to the perception of the transcendent body. In our commentary here, notes on the four-syllable Dakini, Vajravarahi is described as being born without attachment to time. Therefore, I suggest that the yogic exercise, as described in our ritual text, also allows the practitioner to overcome the temporal contingencies, that is, the perception of the three times of past, present, and future, which are the conditions of immanence, and to reach a perception of time without beginning and end, a transcendent time, or even more precisely, a time beyond the concepts of immanence and transcendence. Thus, the experience described in the text is the transcendence that, within this very coarse body, manifests an immanent reality. I am currently not able to come to a definite conclusion yet as to whether we may infer that transcending spatial contingencies has priority over transcending temporal contingencies, that the former is a precondition for the latter, or whether both aspects emerge simultaneously. I suggest that the second option is more in line with doctrinal positions. However, this is a question that should be dealt with in a separate study, and maybe one of you, hopefully still listening here, has an answer to it or some ideas. I finally would like to return to the question raised in the beginning, namely what makes the ritual text, such as the one Meditation on Vajravarahi, in fact, a specific religious text and not just any type of text, conveying, as in our case, a specific religious transcendence. I suggest that on an object language level, the tipping point of the transcending process can be identified in the following sentence, which you see here on the slide. When a drop of wide and cool bodhicitta melts down, and immediately one visualizes emptiness and great bliss experience of union. It is here that the specific Buddhist terminologies are used, namely bodhicitta, emptiness, and great bliss, here written in orange. And it is here that when we apply the three-level model of TID, that formal transcendence turns into a specific religious transcendence. The attainment of a specific religious transcendence, namely the attainment, as our text goes on, of the three bodies of the Buddha, accompanied by the realization of the Buddha qualities such as omniscience and non-conceptuality, allowing the religious performer to move beyond ordinary perceptions of spatial and temporal contingencies. The whole text, my whole argument will eventually, hopefully this year, be published soon in this paper here, but to sum up the gist of it for you, with this new reading of materials, visual and textual sources from Tangutul's Eastern Central Asian Buddhist sites, I suggest understanding the caves in the northern section of the Mogul cave complex, particularly cave 465 with its exquisitely decorated tantric iconographic program, and burial caves such as B121 as sites for tantric ritual practice and thereby as sacred sites. I see 465 as a temple-like structure that would have allowed gatherings for smaller Tantric Buddhist communities, similar to certain halls in nowadays still in use in Tibetan temples for specific ritual purposes. Burial meditation sites, on the other hand, would have served as a secret place for individual Tantric practitioners, similar to how Tibetan Buddhists nowadays still withdraw to hermitages for prolonged periods of retreat. An analysis of the two ritual texts I have presented gives a glimpse into the types of ritual practice that might have been performed by groups or individual practitioners at the Mogao cave complex. As I previously argued, K465 was decorated under Tangut imperial patronage. Tangut rule over Dunhuang came to an end with the Mongol conquest in 1227, which meant the end also of Tangut imperial patronage. However, this does not rule out the fact that Tantric Buddhist communities continue to live in the vicinity of the Mogao caves. And inscriptions, in fact, on the eastern wall of the front chamber of K465 mentions in the year 1335 that the site was referred to as a secret temple, Mimi Si, a reference also found in another site in Yuning Cave 29, which was also produced under Tangut times. We do not know exactly when the ritual objects, like the stand with the skull cap found in burial cave B121, were in use, whether under Tangut rule or a little later. Nonetheless, I suggest that the late 12th and early 13th century is the time when Tantric Buddhist communities would have been present in the caves as well. My application of the three-level model of TID to the just mentioned ritual manual proves that it is possible to identify processes of transcending on the object language level of ritual text, and thereby be able to explicate and identify a transformation from an ordinary perception of immanent reality to a divine transcendent perception of space, physical space, as well as bodily space. Thus, my example illustrated a Buddhist solution to the problem of how to express the inexpressible transcendence by immanent means. Last but not least, a transcendent perception of space also allows for a different perception of time, a time beyond contingencies or timelessness. Thank you very much for bearing with me for so long.
Thank you, Carmen, for that wonderful talk that was loaded with all sorts of things, from archaeological discoveries and interesting observations to theological questions. I would just want to remind everyone we have some time here for questions that we can pose to Carmen. And please write them not into the into the chat window, although I see people are thanking you, Carmen, for your talk, so that's nice.
Thank you. At some point, I wasn't sure whether I can actually still, this is still working or not.
I know. It's really talking into a void. So yes, please do write any questions you have into this question and answer little box that pops up down below when you click on it. I see one question, but I'm going to abuse my privilege and begin with a question of my own here, which I was interested to see you talking about what I guess were these Gana Chakra or salt rituals. And it seemed like you were suggesting that if any tantric ritual may have been performed in this cave 465, that it may have been that. Is that, I think that's what you were implying. And I found that kind of interesting because I've been working, well, not this year, but previously on this Gana Chakra text, Paleo-Tibetan 321. And Yi Ding, who just finished his Ph.D. at Stanford recently, did some work in his dissertation on IOL Tibj 332, which he argued also, I think rightly, also has a Tsoke Gana Chakra text. So, and there are others among the Tibetan manuscripts from Dunhuang. In fact, if you start looking more closely, the longest texts we have from Dunhuang are all Gana Chakra texts. among the ritual works anyway. So I guess my question is, on the one hand, this is very exciting, and the idea that people may have performed Gana Chakra in cave 465 is intriguing. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about whether this might translate to the other caves, since we found earlier texts, not from the Tangut, but before 10th century or something, that talk about Gana Chakra. There are, so many of them. I wonder if you have any thoughts about ritual practice in those other caves.
Yeah, thank you very much for your question. When I first got involved with looking at Dunhuang text and Tibetan Dunhuang text, I used them just to fill in gaps that we have for early Tibetan Buddhist history. And then only later, when developing this project, really, I realized we have to understand what happened in Eastern Central Asia at this time, and in a site like Dunhuang, to understand what happened probably in Tibet as well. So this is why I started to develop this project. And then, as a next step, I understood that these texts were actually I think a lot of them were local protections, I think. And I think when we look at the Tangut times, which is relatively late, 12th, 13th century here, we have these evidences, and we have a lot of information that it was imperial patronage and so on, that we can set up a context. And we lack that part of information for the earlier period and for the Tibetan period or for the Tibetan materials. So it's my invitation to look at those earlier and Tibetan materials also in this respect. I think if we, that's the idea we have with the BuddhistRoad project, to look at this region at large and to understand what the interconnections were between the different oasis towns and so on. And if we look at that, we'll see influences from each other to one side to the other, text objects being brought, people traveling from all sorts of places, and so on. So my argument would be, I have no proof for that yet, but I wouldn't be surprised that sooner or later we can actually prove that these Gana Chakra, Tibetan Gana Chakra texts that you mentioned, that are probably 10th century, were actually also used for practice by local practitioners. Though I have to add, my colleague Henrik Sørensen asked, where were these people based? Who were these guys? So far, Henrik wrote a piece on all the temples in Dunhuang. It's going to be published soon. It's 100 pages long. He investigated, he searched for all little piece of information we have on all temples. And he couldn't find any reference to Tibetans or anything. So we don't know where they were situated, these guys, but they must be somewhere. So in the project, Louis will look at try to localize how tantric texts were actually practiced there. And he will look at Ujnisha Vijaya and other materials. So maybe we can find out a little bit further. And we still like you to contribute to our project as well, if you have something.
Thanks.
So thank you very much. Yeah.
Thanks. So we have one question here. Is there any indication of Dzogchen practice in the Tangut Empire?
I wouldn't be surprised, but I haven't seen that yet. So I wouldn't rule it out. But what we have actually is the Tangut. Once the Tangut started to get interested in Tantric Buddhism, this of course coincided with the so-called second spread of the teachings in Tibet. So when great Kaji masters sent their people anywhere in the realm and also abroad to neighboring countries, they were also sent to the Tangut realm, or they were actually invited. For example, we have the famous case, which was studied also by the late Elliot Sperling, of a student of Dusung Khyentse, the Karmapa, was sent to the Tangut court. His name was Tsangpopa, and he became the first Tibetan imperial preceptor. So here we have evidences that it's more from Kagyu and Sakya influences that we have in the Tangut Empire. Yeah, but it doesn't rule out that we have other things there. And there is a lot of material in various languages. And what we try to do with our project here, the BuddhistRoad project, is just really to scratch on the surface and to give an idea of how we can conceptualize this whole area and what repercussions it could have for understanding the early development of Buddhism in Tibet.
Thanks. We have someone who's wondering, when do you intend to publish this academic paper?
Oh, 21 this year. So it's we have on our website you will find a section publications of the BuddhistRoad project, and it will be published open access. It's in the production process. The book, all articles are written. We are in the middle of the peer review process. So hopefully in the second half of the year, the book should be out and available. The whole book should be available open access.
Great. And then we have a question. Hello, I'm from Yinchuan, the capital of Tangut. The talk was very good. My question is that, do we have a clear time frame for the descendants of the Tanguts when they stopped using Tangut language for religious purposes?
I'm not a specialist in Tangut language, so I don't know that, but I doubt that they ever stopped. Why would they stop? Why would you stop your own language? The interesting thing is that we have actually materials going through various languages. I mean, if you look at the territory, I had this map in the beginning of my talk, where you could see that the Tangut territory covers not only the oasis towns up to Dunhuang, but also covers more Chinese settlements at the Ordos and also sections of what is nowadays Amdo in Tibet, Tibetan areas. So you had actually a multilingual and multicultural society. And we do have manuscripts from Karakoram and other places that go through all languages, that go through Tibetan, that go through Chinese, and that go through Tangut as well, Tangut Tibetan Chinese. Yeah, so I'm just giving an example of what you could do with these materials. And I learned now from one of my colleagues that are Vajravarahi materials. I know that they're in Tangut available as well. And apparently also there are some in Tibetan. So that's interesting that one could see, maybe how terminologies were different, or if there are slight changes done in the various languages.
Right. We have someone else who's asking, not sure why, but whether you've found any references to the uses of sugar or sugar cane in any of the materials you've used as a medicine or product for consumption, or symbolic usage or anything.
In my dreams, yes. I don't know. I'm sorry.
And then another question. Could you speak about the background history of parts of the Mogao complex as funerary sites, the background history for this, and as sites of meditation on death? Is there documentary evidence of those practices from Cave 17?
I think there is a lot of material on funerary rites. I'm not specialized in it. There's this great book by Tyser on funerary rites. Maybe Bob Schaft has something to say about that too. I'm not specialized in it. I cannot say that, but we do know that there were family caves which were used for funerary practices as well, but I'm not able to go into any of those details.
Yeah. That's my impression too. I mean, it's like what you were saying about there's no evidence for what the Tibetans, for example, were doing. I'm sure, aside from the Chinese funerary practices.
Yeah.
There are lots of funerary texts, but we don't know. And then there's a question, is there any evidence of unique modifications to ritual practice that were made by the Tanguts, sort of uniquely, whether in Vajravarahi manuscripts or otherwise?
It's an interesting question, and it's not easy to answer. The one text I mentioned, TK, was 329, seems to be a commentary, and I had an argument with Shenri Rong about this. We once read this together, and whether it would be actually translated from Tibetan, or whether it was actually a commentary done on the occasion of giving teachings on Vajravarahi. And so this would mean that you had a local master giving explanations. And then, of course, this could mean that you had additions done. Or, for example, one thing that I did show in one of my slides, when the name of Vajravarahi was described, the characters were split up. So between Vajra and Varahi, so Hai or Hai Mu. And so the character Hai was described, and then the character Mu. So in Tibetan, you wouldn't do that, but in Chinese, it would make sense to do it separately. So that's a small hint into that direction. Yeah. So I would say yes.
Yeah. And another one. How unusual is it that human remains with skulls removed have been found at Mogao? Are you aware of any other places in Central Asia or China where such skeletons have been found?
When I go to sleep, I travel around those places and try to collect them. I don't know. It's a nice question. I don't know, but it would be an interesting endeavor to question that further, and it would be interesting to find more such things. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if one could see other things. When I browsed through these 3 volumes from the northern section of the Dunhuang caves, I was amazed once I found these things. I thought, wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, that's amazing. And that the stand looks just like in the painting. That was amazing.
Exactly. I mean, I thought that's fantastic, you know. So I think I have a convincing argument here.
Someday you'll have to apply for a research grant to travel China looking for headless skeletons.
Yes, why not?
Here's another question. Who do you think created the manuscripts of Karakoto, the Tanka, and the murals in Cave 465? Is it possible to derive an exact time from the texts as to when they were created? So I guess who created them and when for the manuscript?
Well, I think, as I said before, I have written this other article, which is available open access on our website, about the patronage, the Tangut patronage, imperial patronage. So my argument is that it was under imperial patronage that K465 was created. So the thing is, there is no donor figure in it, and that's why I analyzed it more in connection to related sites from a network approach to see, you know, if we have so many different sites that are coming up, and if you look at a broader picture, then it would make sense to argue, but it's still a hypothesis that it was under imperial patronage. The thing is, it's so exquisitely painted. And what Matthew Kapstein once pointed out to me, the floor is so evenly excavated. So you need a master for all of those things. And of course, you need a lot of money to be able to pay for that. So it only would be possible with a strong patronage. So yeah, that would be the imperial patronage for the cave. And then we had the time, I would say, it starts from the second half of the 12th century that Tantric Buddhism is supported by the imperial court, and particularly with the reign of Emperor Renzong, who had a very long reign for almost 50 years, I remember. And this is also published in my other article that I presented here. It's on our website. You can download that and you can read a little bit more about that. As with regard to the Karakoto text, it's interesting. We don't know, I mean, why they were there. Some of them are, I just finished writing an article which will be published hopefully in the Journal of the International Association of Buddhist Studies soon, if it gets through the peer review process. And there I argue that we have different manuscripts. Some of them are from earlier stages and some of them are from later stages in the editing process. So we know that the Tangut set up an office for the translations of Buddhist scriptures, which they copied from the Chinese imperial court in Kaifeng. And I think they professionalized it to a great degree. So I think from my analysis is, and it's a lot of hypothesis, but you have to advance the field. So you have to eine steile These, as we say in German. And so I believe that they had a professional setup for translating texts and of editing them. And so some texts are heavily edited and some seem to be more complete already. Yeah? But parts of those texts would come from there, and how they end up in Karakoto, that we don't know. There is an article by Ruth Danell who suggested that some of the people who probably had worked close to the capital, when they retired, they moved there was a monastery close to Karakoto, and maybe some of those texts went into some of the stupas there as fillings. Maybe this answers.
Yeah. And another one, thank you for the great talk. Do you get a sense that the primary language of these Ganatraka works was Tibetan? I mean, you just talked about these translation projects from Chinese. That is, do you think your Chinese manuscripts were ultimately recent translations from Tibetan, or were there indigenous self-sustaining Chinese language tantric groups?
It's difficult to answer that question. We certainly know that there were Tibetan masters, quite a number of Tibetan masters coming to the Tangut court or to the Tangut Empire. And even you had, Tibetan areas were part of the Tangut Empire. So you always had an influx also of local Tibetans there. And we know in this one article by Ruth Danell, she does an analysis of, I think, 8 or 10 monks, where we have a lot of information on colophons on. And she can show with that analysis that how texts were translated from one language to the other, or that some of these people knew just all languages. So we have to understand that the communities were multilingual. This was more the rule than the exception, I would say. So I don't know whether it means that tantric texts produced in Chinese only catered for Chinese communities. I don't know, because we still also have them in Tibetan and in Tangut. And so that's hard to say. I have no answer to that.
Okay, thanks. And maybe one last question. Is there any reason to think that women were involved in the Vajravarahi rituals performed in sacred spaces under the control of the Tanguts?
I mean, come on, of course. If you look at the image that's also on the announcement, if you look clearly at how long her hair is, I mean, come on, there must be a woman with really long hair who posed for that. I mean, if you look at Tibetan depictions of Vajravarahi, the hair is different, but there is really long. Sometimes it goes down to the floor. I don't know. That's my guess.
Great. Okay. Thank you. And thank you to everyone who asked questions. And thank you once again to Carmen for giving such a wonderful talk, and to the Khyentse Foundation for making it all possible. And thank you to Sanjot Mahendale for making all the arrangements so easy. Okay, and I guess that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the invitation, for this opportunity. It was lovely, and I hope it worked all.
Yeah, I hope everyone out there who we can't see enjoyed the show.
Bye.